In Galatians 5, Paul tells us in verse 13, Galatians 5:13, "My brothers, remember that you have been called to live in freedom, but not a freedom that gives free rein to the flesh. Out of love, place yourselves at one another's service." Well, this is interesting, especially in Paul's environment. Paul is writing in the days of the Roman Empire. The Roman economy ran on slavery. Indeed, there were many slaves in the church. Slaves who would give anything to be free. And what does Paul tell them? Tell them? He says, you are free. Free to serve. Now that must have been very strange to a slave. You're free, but you're not free to do what you want to do. You're free to serve. Now, that's strange in our day and age. That's not the way we usually think of freedom. When we think of freedom as being free to do the things that we want to do for ourselves. Freedom means we can do whatever we want for ourselves. That's our view of freedom. And yet, Paul is here saying that we can't. We can't use our freedom to choose for self, rather by love. And he's explicit about this in verse 17. In Galatians 5:17, he says, "The flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. The two are directly opposed. This is why you do not do what your will intends." In other translations, he says, this is why you can't do what you want. A strange view of freedom. Freedom means we are free to love rather than to choose to do what we want for ourselves. This is what freedom is. And when our lives become about choosing love, this is the freedom that we want. When we start to see the world as self versus love, and if we start to become transformed towards God, we no longer want self because we see self is the problem. This choosing for self over love, over another human being, is what has caused all the evils in our world. It gives birth to our evil, and it even takes our good and it corrupts it. Because remember, it's not that there's this absolute evil. There is this perfect love of God and departure from it. And maybe it departs this far and we look at it as good. And it departs this far and we look at it as okay. And over here it's evil. Whatever it is, all of them are departures from the eternally sustainable love of God. And when we see this slavery to self, we no longer want to pursue self. The freedom we want is the freedom to be free of this slavery to self, so that now we can choose love and no longer hurt people, no longer tear apart society, but give ourselves in love to others. We want to be free of this slavery to self. That is true freedom. We see this here in the Gospel according to John. Now, in this point of the Gospel, Jesus is talking to the Jewish community who are oppressed by the Romans. The Romans are here, they've conquered the whole territory, they collect taxes, they have the garrison down the road. The Jews are not free. And Jesus says to them in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, beginning in verse 31, Jesus therefore was saying to those Jews who had believed in him, "If you abide in my word, then you are truly disciples of mine, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And then they go on and they say, kind of strange on the Roman occupation, they still come and say, "We are Abraham's offspring, and have never yet been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you shall become free?" So they're thinking in political terms. And Jesus replies, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin. And the slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son does remain forever. If therefore the Son shall make you free, you shall be free indeed." So we see Jesus was not focused on political freedom. Jesus was focused on freeing us from that which truly enslaves us. Sin, our enslavement to choosing self over others, our propensity and our willingness to exploit another human being, to choose ourself over love. And when we can be free of that, that which truly oppresses mankind, that which produces every evil we see in the world, when we're free of that, then finally at last we are truly free. That's the freedom the Christian business plan proposes for humanity, to be free of the slavery to self. And we will come to see that love and freedom go together. Love and freedom are absolutely inseparable. Why? Because for love to be perfect, it must be perfectly free. In other words, if we love because, if we love in order to gain something, we are still enslaved to self. If we love because we want to be loved in return, if we love because we're afraid of being lonely, if we love because we're afraid of being rejected, if we love to do anything to gain for self, our love is not free. Our love is being constrained by something that we're trying to get for self. It's not free. Love is free when it loves just because it is. When it doesn't matter whether we'll be rejected, whether we'll produce love in return, it doesn't matter. When we love just because it is our nature, it is a free choice that does not depend on what we get in return, then love is perfect. Then love is perfect because it is perfectly free. Now, love and freedom are inseparable. But there's one more word we need to add to the mix. Suffering. Because love, freedom, and suffering are inextricably intertwined. It's a critical part of the problem and explains why, or a critical part of the process and explains why a loving God made a suffering world. Love, freedom, and suffering. That's the subject of our next session. The Christian Journey book and the full-sized, full-quality, complete video series are available for free download at www.spiritualoutreach.com.